Greetings, brave adventurers! FoxyBard here, finally released from YouTube jail! Hooray! My time away gave me some much-needed rest, but also an idea. Ever since, I dramatically improved the quality of my videos, especially my audio equipment, I've wanted to revisit that first story I told. But I didn't want to just make an updated version of the first one. I wanted to do the whole story. So that is what I have for you today. A glory story with a dash of horror at the end. A Glorror story, if you will. All taken from my own experiences with my first real group. So grab a seat around the fire as we dig into some stories of Foxy role-playing. The backstory and cast that you need to know. This was Pathfinder 1st Edition. A close friend of mine at the time had been playing with this group for a little while and asked me if I wanted to join in, as they had room for one more player. I said absolutely, I love Pathfinder, so I jumped into the campaign. We were playing the Kingmaker adventure path. So I'm introduced to the group. Jax, my friend, playing an elf druid. Norn, Jax's bird animal companion, and kind of a death machine. Gus will be a problem later, playing a sylph ranger. Jess, Gus's girlfriend, playing a human fighter. Grant, the DM, and me, playing Myth, a half-elf wizard / veiled illusionist. That's a prestige class, they don't have those in D&D anymore. This story starts pretty early into the module. So the party had met and befriended a strange woman who lived in a swamp that was mildly crazy, but overall rather nice and helpful. We'd gone to see her several times for some advice about all the weird fae stuff going on in our burgeoning kingdom. One of these times, when we arrived, she was acting weird. Not like herself. Suddenly, she springs into action and starts attacking us. She was a decent spellcaster, but only barely stronger than I was at the time, so she obviously didn't stand even close to a chance against us. That is, until she started throwing magic that was much more powerful than anything she should be able to do. It didn't take a genius to work out that she'd been possessed. All the martial characters are struggling to hit her because they were all taking penalties to make sure their attacks were non-lethal. Nobody wanted to kill this obviously possessed woman. I'm throwing out control spells like crazy, which I had a lot of, but she's making her save on every single one. I have exactly one spell slot left, and after that, all I can do is throw 1d3+1 damage acid splashes that were lethal, so I have to give it a shot. I cast the spell Unnatural Lust. I had mostly taken it as a joke at first, but it had proven to be insanely good control spell in reality. For those unfamiliar with the spell, if the target fails a will save, they have to run towards a designated target and attempt to kiss that target during their next turn. The odds of this spell working were basically 0, or, rather the 5% of the DM rolling a nat 1 on the save. And it was all I had left, so I had to try. I designated myself as the target, as I was the furthest away and had the most allies along the path to get attacks of opportunity. She failed. On her turn, the old woman stopped trying to do anything except rush toward me in a blind lust. This caused her to move in a line directly through the threatened spaces of all of the martial characters and Norn, who was basically a buzzsaw, provoking attacks of opportunity from all of them. Between Jess, Gus, and Norn, this poor old woman was bludgeoned into unconsciousness, severing the connection to whoever had possessed her. When she recovered, she had no memory of any of it, and we all hoped it wasn't something that bad, as we had more pressing things to worry about. Things went pretty well for a while, until our scouts had some chilling news one day. Our young little kingdom was being invaded. One of our neighbors decided that they wanted our lands and people for themselves, and had moved an army into our region to steal them. I think it was Pitax, maybe Brevoy. This meant we would need to arrange for a standing army, figure out how to do mass combat like that, and basically an entire adventure path book worth of things. With how the group had been handling things like that before, Gus would just end up doing everything out of game without consulting anyone because Jess, his girlfriend, didn't want to be bothered with it. So it would be almost an entire book just for Gus. These kinds of things are part of why I don't really play with this group anymore. Gus was like this about a lot of things, both in and out of game. But more on that later. We had all finally reached a level where we had a decent amount of disposable gold to spend on things we wanted, but didn't necessarily need. Gus had bought himself a spyglass, 1,000 gold pieces in Pathfinder, to aid with scouting. Being a ranger, that seemed like a perfectly fine decision. As a wizard, I often got frustrated about being too far away for my close-range spells to be effective, so I had been saving up for a while, and then finally, I was able to get myself a Rod of Reach that worked with up to 6th level spells, 5,500 gold pieces with my craft rod feat. Finally, I could participate all the time. Now, there was one thing we did have to do as a group, though. Go scout out the enemy camp. As we're making plans on how to have someone infiltrate the camp, on possible ways to get in and out and be safe the whole time, we hear the enemy general start to make a speech. Gus takes out his shiny new spyglass to get a closer look, and the wheels in Myth's brain begin to turn. "Hey, can I see that?" I ask him. He shrugs and hands the spyglass over so others could check out the situation. Holding the spyglass with one hand, I ask about how far away the general is.
"About 500 feet, give or take,"
the DM tells me. Outside of my medium range, but within my long range for spells. Grinning, I take out my new rod, ready to cast a spell I'd had my eye on for a while and been looking forward to. Using my rod to make him in range and the spyglass to be able to see him, I cast Phantasmal Killer. It's a DC 23 will save, then a DC 23 fortitude save. The DM starts laughing as he rolls.
"He fails both. What happens?"
"Oh, he dies." The DM briefly looked up the spell, shook his head, and laughed again. The next bit was another stroke of genius from this DM, who I must insist was the absolute hero of this story, and the reason the campaign was so good, and probably why I stayed as long as I did.
"Seeing their commander scream in terror and then drop dead out of fright demoralizes the soldiers. Word quickly spreads, and they all disband and retreat back to where they came from."
And he looks once at the Adventure Path book, before tucking it back into his bag. The group joked about me becoming the Royal Assassin, which is actually a position you can hold in the Kingmaker setting, though I never really latched on to the title. We went home, and I gained my absolute favorite spell on the character, even if it never worked out quite that perfectly ever again. That didn't stop the DM from trying to use it against us a few times. Luckily, we always made at least one of the two saves. Skipping ahead a bit, near the end of the module, we were transported to the Fey realm to confront them, as they'd been causing chaos and problems for the entire campaign. Jess had a saying that she kept repeating, "Damn fairies!" We were strong enough now that we could easily take care of ourselves, perhaps even win an audience with the king and queen, which, after a bit of fun Fey shenanigans, we did. Myth engaged in quite a few duels of words and wit. The king listened to our story and considered our request. Not wanting to grant it immediately, he told us that should we come on a hunting trip with him, we could have more time to make our case. He hadn't completely ruled us all out yet. Gus was the ruler of our little kingdom, and as such was doing most of the talking. My being a half-elf, however, helped him do that quite well. I could influence the people around me to be more persuasive and charming just by existing. I made you better at diplomacy by being pretty, essentially. That's how we'd gotten this far. Gus's keen words and my natural charm. As the meeting was dismissed and we were leaving, the queen intercepted us and said she wanted to meet privately. So, we agreed. Do not say no when the Queen of the Fae asks you something. It was only then that she revealed that she'd been watching us for a long, long time. Especially me. My half-elf girl was turning into quite the powerful wizard and illusionist, and, as she put it, was the only mortal to ever successfully use magic on her. Wait, what? It was only then that she revealed it had been her who had possessed the old woman all those months ago. The sheer unlikelihood of her failing that save was overwhelming. She'd never failed something like that before, and it caused her character to start paying attention to me in particular. As it also turned out, the spell being so 1 in a million, 1 in 20, but who's counting, gave it a degree of permanence. Not the desire to kiss me, not directly, but a lasting infatuation. She, over the course of the months after, and observing us, and me in particular, had fallen in love with me. I was a bit in shock. This is where I really have to give the DM so much credit. To take something like that minor moment and one-off encounter, and turning it into something that all comes together in the finale of the campaign, was incredible. I can only strive to ever pull off something that good in my own games. So the Queen tells us that if we really want to end the threat to our kingdom, we need to assassinate the king. And his pet jabberwock. I believe we were 13th or 14th level at this point, so even a lesser jabberwock is insanely out of our pay grade, usually. But Jess had picked up a Vorpal sword a few levels back, which gave us odds in our favor. Armed with our newfound knowledge and the blessing of the Queen, we set off on the hunting trip to assassinate the king. Luckily, he went down pretty easily. I don't even remember much of the fight, just that we obliterated him in a round or two. But that was just the warm-up. For those of you unfamiliar, Jabberwocky are some of the most fearsome creatures you can fight in all of Pathfinder. Even a lesser one was CR 20 and has a scope of attacks and special abilities that would turn most parties into pudding, sometimes literally. Needless to say, this fight was going to be intense. The hero ended up being Jess with her Vorpal sword, but we all did our very best. Gus with his crazy buzzsaw of arrows, Jax with a flurry of support and buffing spells, Norn with always being able to provide flanking, and even me having used Form of the Dragon to fly up and throw my control and illusion magic from the air. We eventually brought it down in an epic encounter to end what had been a hell of a campaign. When we return to the palace, the Queen greets us as heroes. Word of the king's death had spread fast, and we were given safe passage back to our realm. All except for me. For, you see, that had been the last piece of the Queen's plan. I was offered the chance to stay with her and become queen at her side. 2 queens of the Fae. Without even a second of hesitation, I said yes, and my half-elf girl took her place on the throne. When someone asks you if you want to be Queen of the Fae, you say yes. And I did. Now, that might all sound pretty good, except for the minor note about Gus. Sadly, it wasn't just a minor note with him. It ended up snowballing into being the reason I ended up leaving the group entirely. For greater context, all the games with this group were played at his house. Now, as stated in my bio and other videos, I'm a trans woman, but these problems started before I'd even come out. In the Kingmaker game, he had decided that my character's name, changed for this story, sounded somewhat like a salacious sex act, and would only refer to her as such. It got so bad that it spread to others in the party, but none of them stuck on it quite as badly as Gus did. I still managed to have fun in the campaign, obviously, but it set a poor tone. A later incident of the same nature happened with a Rapanathuk campaign. I was playing a dwarf woman named Regina, which is a pretty common name. Unfortunately, if you change the pronunciation around just a bit, it becomes Regina, and I don't think I need to tell you what that sounds like. He so refused to use her correct name that I had to change it to Ravina instead, just to get him to stop. Luckily, that character is now one of my favorites, who I still bring back from time to time, but this is only the start to this particular story. Now, when I started playing with this group, I was still in the closet, outwardly identifying as male, long hair, big old denial beard, the works. I had realized I was trans and was playing almost entirely female characters, but I hadn't yet come out or started my transition at all. There was a while where I had to take a break from the group due to work schedules conflicting, but when I did finally come back, it was as a girl. They were mostly accepting and tried to get everything right, so that was encouraging. But obviously, I wouldn't be telling you all about this if there wasn't an issue. And that issue was Gus. Gus's attitude toward the women around him was very possessive, in a way that wasn't very healthy. He was always flaunting his girlfriend Jess in front of the table, groping her without asking, always telling her what to do and how to play, taking advantage of her to do everything around the house, that sort of thing. What's more, it extended to the other players. The other girl playing, who was Gus's ex, had started to date someone, a pretty nice guy. But after meeting Gus once, they broke up. I'm not privy to what happened in that conversation, but the timing was too convenient. This had already made me mildly uncomfortable, but I stayed because my partner at the time really liked the group, and I didn't want to abandon them. We spoke in private, but it was never quite enough. Where that edge finally slipped for me was a session or two after I had come out to the party. Gus, who had previously been nothing but respectful to me, began to treat me as lesser. He began to make jokes at my small chest, tease me for things he perceived as only girls doing, said I should flash the table, show off my panties, the works. All of the respect he had was just gone. I confronted him about it, and he said, "I'm just treating you like any other woman. You should be happy." And that's when I realized it wasn't just Jess or the other girl. That was how he saw all women. I did not return the next week, and haven't even really spoken to him since. My partner at the time ended up also leaving the group a few weeks later after we talked about it. It was something of a shock to me. I had only just started living my life as a woman, and I'd never had to be directly exposed to the overt sexism that a lot of men can have. I'd heard about it plenty and believed all the stories I'd been told, but this was my first direct encounter. It wouldn't be my last, but watching someone who respected me turn into the worst human I knew was disheartening. I didn't play any TTRPGs for quite a while after that. But I'm glad I eventually did come back. And there it is, the whole saga. Done much better this time. I should have seen the red flags earlier. I should have taken my gut being uncomfortable around this guy as a sign, but I didn't. This was my first real group, and it was consistent and scratched the itch for TTRPG content that I've never been fully able to shake since. I think we've all done some dumb things in our first groups, and this was mine. Everything is so much better now. I love my current group that I DM for. They're always engaging with the worlds I create, the characters, and we've been playing together for a few years now. I wouldn't trade them for the world. Though, I guess if they're part of the world, so I could just get them back? That doesn't make sense, Foxy. I do hope you all enjoyed this story in one sitting. Don't forget to like the video if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not yet done so, hit the notification bell icon if you'd like to be notified when new videos go up, and leave your comments down below. Every one of these helps the channel. If I can get to 1,000 subscribers, I'll be able to join the next Dice Goblins. Hopefully. They could use some feminine influence. But until such a time comes, let's douse the fire and get back to our own adventures.